Coming up on Echoes of Empathy with Josh Findley.
It seemed like that was the pit. You didn't want to be that guy, right? Let me go do a homicide, hit and run, a shooting. Oh, the poor child crimes guy. If somebody like you is saying it's the worst thing that they've ever seen, I want to know what it is. You don't want to know. I want to know. He was quiet for 5 minutes and he said, "You're right. I didn't want to know that." Attorney called me and we're discussing a case. I'm discussing the probable cause. I look over and she's looking at me like, "What in the hell are you talking about?" When I look through the images next week, if any of those abuse images are from the last 6 weeks, that's on me. We rescued that kid, arrested the abuser. 7 hours and 26 minutes after he sent the image, she was still wearing the same clothes. The bed was still in the same condition.
Welcome to Harmless, the podcast. I'm your host, Eric Oldenburg. And today, we'll be talking to a very, very special man. This man is named Josh Findley. You probably have not heard this name unless you are in this world. Josh is not one for the limelight. Josh is one for the work. He is one of the original pioneering investigators who asked a simple question. Is anybody trying to figure out who that child in that picture is? That question spawned a movement that changed the landscape of internet crimes against children investigations for all time. It swung the pendulum from offender-based investigations to victim-focused investigations. I named this episode Echoes of Empathy because Josh Findley, in all facets of his life, whether it be personal or professional, he has the capacity and the capability of showing empathy. This is a person who has rescued victims from the horrors and atrocities committed against them. Yet he still has it in his heart to show empathy to the offenders, as controversial as that may seem. But as you'll hear in this interview, in every facet of Josh's world, there is an echo, a deep echo of empathy. This is the first of several interviews I hope to have with Josh. This is just to get to know him as a person and what he's gone through. In future episodes, we'll have conversations about some of the specific cases he's done and the amazing victim identification efforts and success stories, moving the needle from offender-based to rescuing real human beings. So without further ado, I give you Echoes of Empathy with Josh Findley. This has been an absolutely incredible week in my life, and it's not even halfway over. And I'm already getting to interview one of the most, if not the most, originally influential people in the victim identification world. And I'm getting goosebumps thinking of the ripple effect that has happened in this world because of people like Josh. And I am so fortunate that he's alive, that he did what he did, that he does what he does, and he has quite literally changed the world. And I am so proud to have him on my podcast today. So Josh, thank you so much, brother. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it. I'm glad to be here.
Tell me about Josh.
I am from Newberg, Oregon originally. I grew up in a small town outside of Portland, Oregon. I had two grandparents that went to Newberg High School. Both my parents went to Newberg High School. All my aunts and uncles lived here. I can't go to the grocery store for less than an hour still because I still live here. I've had two kids graduate from the same high school, fourth generation. It's been a cool experience.
The picture of a small town, I would say?
Absolutely. Out in wine country in Oregon. I don't know, when I was probably like 13, 14 years old, just like getting into high school, my dream was to become an FBI agent. What you saw on TV and all that kind of stuff. And shortly after I graduated from high school, I was working as a plainclothes detective at Tower Records. So some people on your podcast may remember what a a record was or a cassette
I
tape.
remember Tower Records. I knew where the Tower Records was in Phoenix. So yes.
Yes. So I was working there. I'd gotten an apartment like the month after I graduated high school. And I was like, I'm going to take a year off. I'm going to do this year thing. About 6 months into that year thing, I was like, you know what? I'm lazy and I'm not putting in college applications or anything like that. So my father and my grandfather had both been in the Army. I was like, I need some discipline in my life. I joined the U.S. Army in 1993 to become a military policeman. That was to hopefully further my efforts in law enforcement and to get to that federal agent status. After that, I was enlisted as a military police and I wanted to continue working towards my goal. And in the Army, they had a thing called Army CID, which is the Criminal Investigation Division. So I looked into that and the requirements, and I needed an associate's degree. So I started going to night school, applied, went through all the procedures, and became a special agent for Army CID. I got shipped off to Germany. I got married. I got my first kid, who was 3 at the time, who's just a wonderful human being, and I love him, and he's still my son. So I went off to Germany and did drug investigations, did undercover stuff for Army CID, did some homicides, and culminated that career in Kosovo in 1999 in June when the U.S. forces first went in. We did homicide investigations every day for about 6 months.
And this is like battlefield homicide stuff. Like, explain a typical homicide that you would investigate while you're over there, if you could even call it that.
We had old stuff, so bodies that had been left from when the Serbians had left. We would have accidental deaths. When Serbia left Kosovo, they took all the cops, all the ambulances, everything. Nothing. Every death, basically, we would go out to and investigate. Suicides, accidental, homicides, and then we would find places where there were mass body graves. We would deal with those as well. It was just that on a daily basis. I then got out of the Army after that experience and started applying for jobs and got on for a really short time with the Warm Springs Police Department, which is where I met the infamous Jim Cole. We started our relationship in 2000.
Is he on Warm Springs as well? Is this because he never told me the agency he was with?
Yeah, it was Warm Springs Police Department. They ended up hiring me. He was on the panel that interviewed me. I was applying for all these federal jobs and I left. I went to the Treasury Department to work for the Inspector General, and Jim stayed with Warm Springs, but he and I just grew this bond when I was there. He would call me and talk about his homicide cases because I had a lot of experience with it. And I would call him and talk about the BS cases that I was working. And then Jim ended up switching and getting hired on with U.S. Customs. So a year later, Customs had a lateral announcement. In 2004, I went over to HSI. Jim and I started working together again. It's funny because when we were with Warm Springs, there was a detective that did child crimes, and it seemed that was the pit. You didn't want to be that guy, right? You didn't want to do the child crimes. And dude, let me go do a homicide. Let me go do a nice hit and run, a shooting. Oh, the poor child crimes guy, Horny Bob. And we call him Horny Bob because of anything inappropriate. His last name was Hornbuckle. So Bob had to do it. And it's like throughout the Army CID stuff, again, child cases was what I avoided. And then Jim and I started working together in 2004. I'd done one CSAM case with the Treasury Department with an IRS employee that was accessing CSAM on their computer. And then this whole world changed for me when Jim and I, we got 300 leads that were knock and talks throughout the state of Oregon.
How do you get these leads you're talking about? How does a federal agent receive a lead in this field?
In that time, there was a site in Russia that was allowing access to CSAM with payment by a credit card. It took our agency working with the Russian government about 18 months to actually get the credit card data used to pay to have access to the site. we had a problem because in the District of Oregon at the time, they had set a kind of artificial date on that anything over a year old wouldn't be sufficient for probable cause. So now we have these 300 leads and we can't get search warrants for them. Jim and I and some other agents from our office started just knocking out leads, knock and talk style. Let me go to your house. Let me say, hey, I'm here. I have information that you had access to at that time, child pornography, and I'd like to talk to you about it. You could help us out. We started doing that. And Jim and I got really good at that. We were at probably 90% consent on, yes, you can come into my house, and yes, you can look at my computer.
And then just to clarify, what is a knock and talk?
So knock and talk is, so you don't have probable cause for a search warrant, but you can always have a consensual interview. So you go and knock on somebody's door and say, hey, I would like to talk to you. And it's their choice whether they let you in or not. There's an art to that. There's definitely a skill to getting into that door and to making a connection with that person, developing some trust. At the end of the day, you're going to ask them for consent to seize their computer and to search it. That involves a lot of trust and a lot of building a bond with those people. We became really good at that, started just working cases. Then I became a shit magnet.
Just so you know what a shit magnet is, and I may put this in the definitions and explanations. I don't know if it's unique to law enforcement, but there's always one guy or one gal that everything they go to, no matter how innocuous it is, turns into a complete shit show. Hence the term shit magnet. So thank you, Josh, for admitting you are a shit magnet. They do exist, and I've got one right here.
Yes, absolutely. So yeah, and that started my journey down CSAM and exploitation. I'd always loved interviews. That was my favorite thing. That's what I wanted to be good at, with great people like Jim Cole, Aaron Burke, all these people that I got to work with. And they entrusted me to do a lot of their interviews, and it made me better. And I hope I made them better at it along the way as well.
I love what you said, Josh, about that you need to develop a connection and trust, which is basically treating somebody with dignity and respect and being truthful about what's happening. You're a human being in a situation. They're a human being in a situation. There's no need to look down at anybody. There's no need to do this. You have a job to do, and you treat them as you would wish to be treated. If that happened to you, if a police officer knocked on your door, you treat them exactly the way you would want to be treated. Not a lot of police officers have that skill. I've done plenty of knock and talks with people that argue their way out of getting consent.
I'll probably get criticisms from law enforcement on here that I'm giving away too much. One of the ways I really liked to connect with people was through what I term as theme building. Everything that I would see, everything that I would do, book I would read, anything, I'd go to church, the sermon from the pastor. I'd be like, hey, how can I use that to build a connection with somebody so we can have trust and we can talk? It was funny that you said that, because one of the themes that I loved to use was who Pat Tillman is.
Yes.
So Pat Tillman died in Afghanistan, gave up professional football, went there, did a tour in Iraq, all those kind of things.
What a hero that man was.
I was a huge fan of his commitment to our country and his sacrifice for our country. When a book came out about him, I read the book. In the book, the author tells this story about Pat Tillman growing up in California and getting in a fight outside of a pizza parlor. His friend was getting beat up. He chased down some dude and punched the dude. Turns out that guy hadn't touched his friend. He hit the wrong kid. So he was getting charged with a felony assault. He's a senior. He's got the scholarship offer for ASU. And in the book, the author's interviewing all these people, and the judge ends up giving him a misdemeanor. He's able to have the scholarship and go to ASU. And the victim's girlfriend were really upset by the fact that the judge let him off for the perception of that he was an athlete, he was a jock, and that's why he got off. Fast forward to 15 years later or whatever, the former girlfriend is driving in the car, and she hears on the radio that Pat Tillman was killed in Afghanistan. and she had not heard the name for however many years it was. And she hated the guy. She thought he was a prima donna. He was this
Yeah.
evil jock who would beat up her boyfriend. And she heard on the radio all these great things that he had done with his life and the sacrifices that he had made. And she said to the author that she pulled over to the side of the road and she just cried. And she came to the realization that you can't judge any person for their worst moment. In talking to these people, I'll recount that story. I would recount it. I would go through it just like I did with you. And I'd be like, I don't judge you for your worst moment. It was a mistake. It was that. You can build and develop trust through stories like that, through connections. I would gauge what kind of suspect I was dealing with and what was important to them. So if they're a very religious person, I might bring in a Bible story that I heard 3 weeks ago in church and see how I could use that to connect with them and to let them know that they weren't judged and that their worst moment isn't what should define them.
Absolutely. It's interesting. I was just teaching, I won't say where I was teaching recently, but I was teaching mental health with Shift, and we started talking about empathy. That's part of the class. But then I flipped it and I said, I think it's also important to have empathy for the offenders. And oh my goodness, did I get pushback? Are you kidding me? The typical gruff, whatever. But that's not the point. This is a human being. That's what you just embodied, is empathy. And I love that, because that's how I treated people. Is I never judged anybody. I never judged anybody for any offender. I looked at them as a human being, and I don't have any specials. I don't have any special interrogation skills. It sounds like you were really into your craft and you trained yourself and you earned these skills. I never did anything like that. I just went in there and would talk to people. That's the baseline. You want this person to talk to you about the deepest, darkest secret that they've ever had. They can't share with a single other human being. They can't tell their mother. They can't tell their wife, kids, nobody. Now they have a chance to talk. So that's catharsis for them. If you hold space for them to tell you, just like you'd hold space for your child to tell you something terrible that happened, they're going to tell you.
Yeah. And it's crazy because it's something you don't talk about. I've taught interview classes around the world. And one of the first things I do is I pick a student and I'm say, tell me in detail about the last time you jerked off. Oh, that's not comfortable? Oh, you don't want to do this? Like, now, if we arrange this in a different way and you and I sit down and we connect, there's a reason for you to tell me this, where we're going to progress forward, and there's a plan that I might be able to get victims information from your computer and rescue kids, whatever it is that you're going to frame your need for consent for, but it allows that person to open up. You can't just expect this to be a nonchalant conversation.
Yes.
I would cry with them. I would hug them. I even received letters from jail from offenders.
Think about the impression you left on a human being like that. You held space for them. Yeah, they're in whatever situation they're in, but you allowed them to do that. And you gave them that catharsis. So I would be grateful as well.
I had one offender. And of course, full disclosure, if you write the detective or agent on your case a letter, they have to disclose it to the attorneys. I gave it to the attorney, and they gave it to the defense attorney, and the defense attorney was upset with the fact that her client had written me a letter, and he wrote me a second letter from jail. And he said, my attorney, and he said her name, and he said, she would be hotter than fish grease at a fish fry if she knew I was writing you again. And it was the funniest. I know that this is going to piss off my attorney, and I'm not.
But I'm doing it anyway.
But I like you, and I want to talk to you, and I want to get that information. Yeah. And that's where, and that's where that empathy, that connection, knowing that human beings make mistakes, but we do have laws. I've been held accountable. I've made mistakes.
With the empathetic piece, one of the students in the class, he said, I'm not empathetic towards any of them. And then someone said, maybe for interviewing. And he's, if I could use it to get them to talk to me. And I'm just like, no, that's not real. That is not real empathy. If you're using this, if you're putting on this fake car salesman thing just to move units, That's not what we're doing. You are humanizing the person, because I'm sorry, everybody. I did this job for many years, and every single person that I arrested was a human being with a family, with hopes, with dreams. Yes, they did something horrible. Yes, they need to be held accountable for it. But at the end of the day, they're just another one of us walking around. It could have easily been me that when I'm 14 years old, all of a sudden I realize I'm attracted to children. That could have been me. And how would I have handled it? It's beautiful that it's so important to you, and you made that something that you developed your skills around. And that's just, I love it. That's fantastic, Josh. And you are definitely the exception to the rule. And I hope you know that. Way the exception to the rule.
I hope I'm not anymore. I hope in teaching and in talking and doing things like this, that message resonates. I hope it resonated with the people that I taught and the people that I worked with. Yeah, sometimes it's really hard. So I do get that, and I do appreciate the people who struggle with it, because there are some evil human beings out there.
The thing that you said about in class, when you walk up to it, you pick a student, you say, describe in detail the last time you jerked off. That question right there would educate a completely uneducated person as far as how vulnerable someone has to be in order to say these things, right? It's because it's all vulnerability, right?
Right.
And you have to understand that these people that are doing this, they've been locked down in whatever their mental prison it is. They can't tell anybody, can't talk to anybody. So now you have this ability to say something, and you have someone that truly cares, that truly looks at you as a human being. It's not just getting it off your chest. There's consequences at the end of this. So it's not just vulnerability of say, I jerked off. If that student knew that at the end of the conversation, if he described it, he's going to go to prison, then no way. So that is a great example of how intimate and how difficult it is.
They're carrying that burden, though.
Yes.
Like in one of your most recent episodes, you were talking about that the internet created this ability for them to have connections and do all those things. That doesn't replace human connection. Right? That doesn't replace sitting down with somebody and unbearing this burden and getting it off your chest. Maybe what's helped me be empathetic is I truly believe that they broke the law. I truly believe that it was based on a sexual desire that they had that is illegal, and that they should face their consequences and punishment and become a better person. I feel like a lot of those people, that's what they want. They want to unburden themselves of this secret.
Yes.
They want to have somebody who doesn't judge them and can just say, look, I get it, but you screwed up. Like, you can't do it. And this is how we're going to move on. And how can we frame this in the best way for you and for society? Everybody can move on and become better. And that was the theory that I moved through on dealing with interviews.
But imagine that, just admitting that you're doing something that goes against societal norms, but it's highly illegal, it's destructive, and the minute you say it, everyone turns their back on you. I can't imagine having that secret, but this is a secret. You cannot talk to anybody about this face to face. You have to be a fake thing. And then what that ends up doing is it drives the disconnection between the person and the child in the image or video. I believe it's a whole disconnect.
You get to the second part of my interview is when I'm talking that it's like, hey, I realize that this is a sexual gratification to you, like that you're looking at a Playboy. In your mind, that's what you're doing. But I want you to think about this 6-year-old girl who wasn't able to consent and was raped by her father. From that day on has dealt with the shame and pain. And just like in one of your last episodes, you were talking about seeing somebody on the outside and them making eye contact and having that panic attack as a victim. In the process of that interview, I would explain that to them. This is not a victimless crime.
Yeah.
These kids are out there, and you might be able to help me find more. And so, yeah, I really enjoyed interviewing, if you can tell.
It sounds like you're really good at it too. That's one of the things that Judge Ostrowski said in his interview was, imagine the absolute worst, most shameful moment of your life is on the internet for all time to never be taken down. Just that. I couldn't even begin to imagine what that would feel like.
I have had that opinion for the last 18 years. So he was just music to my ears when he said that, because, and I guess I'm rethinking something now, and that I said I was a shit magnet, which I would never want a victim to think that I was talking about them. I guess I would like to clarify that
Yes,
I
yeah.
just did hands-on cases that were awful, and as much as I would consider myself a shit magnet, I would consider myself just lucky to have had impact and to have influence on young people's lives. I say that in the really most crass law enforcement way when I said shit magnet, but I've been blessed to be able to interact with a lot of victims on a lot of different levels. They suffer every day, and there's no way we can take that away from them. But hopefully, having empathetic, passionate law enforcement officers out there takes away some of that pain.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Knowing somebody has your back,
Yeah.
back, knowing that. And that has to be so difficult to be in that situation. So now you're doing these knock and talks. Do you think that as you were doing those, you said you got about 90% people said, yes, you can look at my computer?
Yeah.
You said you and Jim developed like a rapport and everything. And I did that with my partner. It was great. We could talk to anybody and there's just, man, it's like a bromance. Like I'm telling
Yeah.
you, having a partner in law enforcement is like having a girlfriend or a boyfriend that just gets it and you can just play off each other. And when you get that, it's magical. And
Yes.
me and my partner was magical. And I'm sure you and Jim, it was magical. But
Uh,
my question to you is this do you think that shaped, like, at the very beginning of it, do you think you were an empathetic investigator at that point, or did you build empathy while doing these knock and talks? Because this was the beginning of you even getting into this realm. Is that correct?
Yeah. I would say that it's definitely ingrained in me. I am an empathetic person. You give me a Clydesdale Super Bowl commercial and I'll probably cry. Or give me a video of a soldier coming home and greeting his kids after being deployed for a year. I'm going to cry. I'm the biggest baby in the world. Like,
I love that.
empathy is ingrained into my system. Let me pause you for 1 second.
Sure.
Come here. Sorry, I'm doing a podcast. Sorry.
Was she like, you're too old to do a podcast, Dad?
Yeah. No, she came home, she's looking at me like, "You're an idiot."
I don't think that's the case.
Oh,
How old is she?
17. She gave me one of the greatest wake-up calls, and this was probably, like, 2 years ago, because 'cause we're always at work, right? You know what I mean?
Mhm.
You're always on your phone, and her and I were driving in the car, and a assistant United States attorney called me, and we're discussing a case, and it involved, I think, like a six-year-old boy being raped by his grandfather. I'm discussing like the probable cause end of things and how we're proving things and the tattoo and the voice comparison and all this kind of stuff. I look over and she's sitting in the fucking car next to me. And I was like, she's looking at me like, what in the hell are you talking about? And I was just like,
Oh,
man, I'm a shitty dad right now. So it was like, yes, I ended up calling a therapist on that one to work through it.
I tell people this. I'm not sure if I mentioned it before, but I'm a big fan of therapy. I'm a big fan of talking to people about this. But would you agree that it takes a specific type of therapist in order to deal with what you're giving them? Because if you just take a run of the mill marriage counselor and you just throw all this on them,
100%.
yes,
I'm going to spike up your hate mail from the therapist community that listens to your podcast. But it takes a special one because a lot of us can run circles around them.
a good point.
I know what answer you want to hear. I know what the outcome that I want from this therapy session to be. So how do I manipulate it to get it to where I want to be? And I'll tell you the little pieces of information that I need to know. It takes you being ready to unload on somebody, first of
Yes.
all. And then it does take somebody who has experience in dealing with trauma-informed therapy, all those kind of things. It takes that for them to be able to actually help you unpack things.
Yes. And that's what's so important is not enough of us have that skill. Number one, you said it, you have to be ready. And in order to be ready, you have to accept what's going on. That's the first thing, is you have to accept it. It's like an alcoholic. Like, you can't tell somebody that doing CSAM investigations screw them all up. They have to tell themselves it screwed them all up. And when they get to that point, and please understand, that is an extremely difficult step to take, especially in law enforcement, to admit weakness, admit something's wrong, right? You know how that is. It's weakness. You have to admit it first. And there is zero shame in admitting that something hurt you. There's absolutely zero shame in it. And I hate the fact that law enforcement has this stigma. If you get shot in the line of duty, if you get in a car accident, you get your leg broken, they're going to take care of you, no questions. And you're not going to feel ashamed. You're not going to not want to call your sergeant because you wrecked your car. Someone hit you. No. But when you're looking at a video or an image and it takes you back, and now you're seeing your children, that is a huge step to be able to say, this is happening and now I'm ready to face it. Would you agree with this? You can't move past a wound. You can't move past it without opening it up, examining it, cleaning it out, and making it better. You have to process your trauma. And in order to process it, you got to admit it and then be ready for it. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. It's sometimes really hard. There's trauma, and then there's trauma, and then there's trauma on top of trauma. One of the things I wanted to talk to you about, you had Jim Cole on your podcast, and I thought he made a fantastic point, because I always think we leave out our computer forensic people, our forensic interviewers, our analysts, all those people that are vicariously traumatized through this stuff. One of the things that Jim brought up was that as the agent, at least in his experience, that being able to rescue the kid, to be able to see that kid come out of the house, gives him a coping mechanism, right?
Oh, yes, absolutely.
That maybe all those other people don't have, right?
Yeah, 100%. And I have never been the case agent in the rescue of a child. I've been on the squad with people that have done it, but I never have done that. And not even doing that, I can only imagine it wipes away the drudgery of all the combing through all this material and countless hours. When you go and you pull that child out of the situation, that is exactly what you're supposed to be doing. That is 100% mission accomplished right there. But the problem is that they never taught us, because we're so offender based. Law enforcement, we're all offender based.
Yeah.
Arrest the bad guy, arrest the bad guy, arrest the bad guy. But you and Jim broke through that and you went victim based. And that has to make you feel better. For yourself as well, because man, you're really making a difference. You see the difference.
It does, but I wanted to provide the counter to that. I totally agree with everything he said, and he blew my mind, and I had never thought of it in that way. But now that I'm retired, I have more time to think. I thought about it more. This is back in 2008, I think. End of the year, between Christmas and New Year's, and what happens in federal offices in that time of year, right? Everybody's got their use or lose leave, and there's so many holidays, and it's like a ghost town. This federal agency came to me and they said, hey, we have a case where one of our employees was accessing his Yahoo email and he was communicating with somebody and they exchanged CSAM material. So I'm like, all right, what do you got? I remember Jim and Aaron were both in my office when we were going through everything. And I had these two agents from, I think it was the Department of the Interior Office Inspector General. We're going through it, and these messages are from this, and I'll verbalize my air quotes, mom who was abusing her daughter and then trying to get this guy to send images, CSAM images, to the quote mom. It's in this just dead week. I look at him and I'm like, dude, this is a 50-year-old dude who lives in his mom's basement with thick glasses and a beard. We'll send out the subpoenas. You can do the warrant on your employee. I'll do the warrant on the guy he's talking to. And I'll let you know when the subpoena results get back. That's normal, the way we process things. But if I'd actually believed there was a kid being abused, it would have been different, right? We would have done exigent subpoenas and exigent summonses and all that kind of stuff.
Yes.
6 weeks later, now we're looking at late February. I got my target, I got the subpoenas back, and I go and I do surveillance on my target's house just to get a pattern of life and stuff. And I see a 6-year-old girl run in the front door. And I was like, fuck.
Yeah.
So we do the warrant the next day. This couple was abusing the mom's 6-year-old daughter, dad's stepdaughter, and her 13-year-old son, who was on a breathing tube and a feeding tube. He had cerebral palsy. He's in this almost like adult-sized crib, and we're finding, like, while we're doing it, we're doing an on-site exam. We're finding pictures of both kids being abused. We end up calling out our local partners. We end up making arrests. We get confessions. It's all good. But driving home that night, so great feeling, right? You rescue 2 kids. But
Yep.
I'm like, when I look through the images next week, if any of those abuse images are from the last 6 weeks, that's on me.
Oh, but it's not, Josh. It's not. I understand the feeling. I completely
But that's
get
the
that.
feeling, right?
Of
And that's one of the things that I've always taught since that time is that, hey, if you have the allegation of abuse, no matter how far-fetched you think it is, treat it as real. I remember calling up a buddy of mine that night who was a psychologist for Ontario Provincial Police Services and talking to him about it. That kind of stuff will hit you hard.
Yeah, I can imagine. One of the things that I struggled with, Josh, was we would conduct a search warrant and there'd be this completely unaware wife, maybe some kids that have absolutely no idea what's going on. And I just basically walked into her life and her house and I set off a bomb. I just did a suicide bomb into her house. So now the offender's going to jail and everyone's going back to the office. Everyone's going back. The command van leaves. And I can't tell you how many times I just pulled around the corner and sobbed for 15, 20 minutes, wondering what this poor woman's going to do to pick her life back up again and how she must feel knowing that she had this monster living with her. That was the gut punch, like every search warrant. I will say there are some of the wives that absolutely know what's going on. They're a part of it and they're totally complicit. But you've also, I know you have, because everybody who's done this work for any length of time has done it where there is a person that has no idea and you just destroyed their life on a Tuesday afternoon.
Oh, absolutely. And the kids, and you take away that, and then now we're on welfare. We got to sell the house. Like, dude, that all plays.
That absolutely speaks to your empathy and passion for the work. Who else would walk up to you and say, Josh, if you took care of this 6 weeks ago, nobody would do that to you, but we do it to ourselves. Nobody would come up to you and say, Josh, if those pictures were there, it's your fault. But we tell ourselves that. That's not okay. We can't, like, it's us, right? Who would say that?
Would say that to me.
And I say it to me too. I blew up a household and people are like, no, you did this great thing. But I blew up a house. And you're like, but I drug my feet but you didn't know. And that's why I love the fact that you're like, listen, if there's an allegation, it's so worth it.
Can I give you the counter to that story that I just told, or the opposite equal?
Please.
You're going to love this. So we've come so far since then. Like that, I think that case was in 2008, right?
Mm-hmm.
We had an undercover task force officer in North Carolina receive an image of abuse from an offender on an online platform. So that task force officer had to subpoena the online platform to get the ISP. He has to then go to the internet service provider and see who's that ISP is assigned to. Then it comes back to Oregon. Then we start doing our suspect research and we got to go to the U.S. Attorney's Office and get a warrant. We got to contact the local police. And turns out this guy had threatened suicide by cop a couple weeks prior. Now we have to get the SWAT team involved and go through all these things. We got to get a judge to review and sign the warrant, all those things. It's just huge, long process, right?
Right.
We had that happen and we rescued that kid, arrested the abuser, 7 hours and 26 minutes after he sent the image, she was still wearing the same clothes. The bed was still in the same condition as it was during the abuse pictures.
Wow. Oh, that's insane.
And that's not me, that's a whole team. That's everybody doing their job and doing the things. And to go from this sunken feeling 16 years ago where I'd fucked up and not treated it right and let this go on for an extra 6 weeks where I probably didn't have to. Now we've dialed that in 7 hours and 26 minutes after the dude sends the picture. The girl's still wearing the same clothes.
That's less than a shift. That's insane. That's less than one shift. That's incredible.
Everybody did their job. I'm just inspired by that. I think people are getting it. I think judges, prosecutors, internet service providers, online service providers, everybody's starting to get it. We're working together, we're working as a team. There are cases like that. There's still hiccups, there's still things, but that's a shining example of the system working right.
And learning from your past, right? Learning and adjusting
Absolutely.
and iterating and making better. And that's what we have to do, especially in this. I have to say, and I think you would agree with me, that it's all about telling your stories and being open about this job so you can pass on the information to other people so they can learn. When I first started, there was no one ever asked anything about any of the children in the pictures ever. No, it was not even a consideration. And to turn that into victim identification, it gives an investigator. When I sat down on this job and the 15 people behind me, there was no hope of anything. All there was a paycheck and trauma.
Yeah.
You gave us hope. Creating a victim identification program gave every single investigator doing this job just a tiny little bit of hope. And in that, we were able to give victims hope, an exponential amount of hope because of the program. You changed the world. You changed my world. I don't even know you two. I didn't know you guys. I barely know you. And you changed my world. You changed my life. And I was able to change other people's life because you changed my life. And I'm just one guy out of this endless sea of investigators. Again, this is not to detract any way, shape, or form from the victims. Absolutely not. This is 100% about them. I like to fancy myself a representative of the people doing this job. And I'm just from this perspective. It is awe-inspiring. It truly is. So thank you.
Thank you very much, and I appreciate that. I guarantee you, for everything that I've given to you or other investigators or you passed on, that there are people in my past who have given that to me, and they've taken me under their wing and given me their
Exactly.
experience and saw potential in me to do a good job.
This gets back to you being a shit magnet. Now, when we were having a discussion about being a shit magnet, from my perspective, was typically a patrol thing. So it had nothing to do with any child crimes or anything like that. But I have to tell you, every single shit magnet, without exception, in patrol, was one of the most tenacious, passionate investigators I've ever seen. Shit magnets become passionate investigators. And I think that's why you're a shit magnet, because the world knows you're open, you're ready for it.
Well,
And that's,
appreciate
I honestly, I'm thinking back to all the shit magnets I've worked with, and they're some of the most commendable people I've ever worked with, but they also turn into these amazing investigators.
So I appreciate that, and I'm going to just take you in a completely different direction.
Please
And
do.
I want to ask you about, so a lot of people ask me, like, what's the worst thing you've ever seen? Have you been asked that question?
Yes.
I've given it some thought, and it's weird. Some of the most horrific things that I've seen haven't impacted me as much as just really small things. I investigated a series that they put the music to a Britney Spears song in the background. I came home one day and my daughter is singing that Britney Spears song on the Wii Play. There was this creepy grandpa that's abusing this girl up in Northwest Oregon, and it's like this scene out of Psycho, right? where you see the shower curtain open and he's holding the camera and the girl's
Yes.
unaware of him and she's taking a shower and he's filming her. And then she notices it and she like jumps back and she's, oh, it's just you, grandpa. And then she goes back to taking the shower. Some of the things that have impacted me the most aren't like this gory, oh, there's blood or fecal matter or whatever. Anything that brings it personal to you. My kid has that same bed sheet, or my daughter sing the song, or that this girl is just so used to the abuse that like her first reaction was right, grandpa, like this is
Yeah.
freaky. She's just been so conditioned and groomed that it's like weird things like that have stuck out to me in my career. People ask you like the worst thing, if you told them it was a grandpa taking a video of his granddaughter in the shower, they'd be like, you probably haven't seen anything. It's just the
Really?
way it impacts you. It's the way that it hits you.
Yeah. My career broke me. There was a case that broke me, and I had to retire because of this case. It wasn't a particular video. It wasn't this horrific abuse video. It was a collection of, he was a 70-something-year-old British fellow that had been a United States citizen for the last 20 years working at Motorola. He was literally a rocket scientist, and he got caught trading child exploitation on a peer-to-peer network. And all of his stuff was locked down, and he had computers everywhere. He had 1.5 million pictures and videos that were pornographic or child exploitive. This was 2018. Back before you could prompt things up with AI, he had a program where he was creating his own virtual child exploitation, and he was building scenarios. He had this one, I can't get it out of my head. It's a panel van in a dungeon somewhere, and there's children, their mouths are taped and their hands are behind their back, lined up to get in the van, and there's a priest leading him into the van. This man created this from scratch, and there were hundreds of these little things. I looked so deep into that man's mind that it destroyed me. I couldn't do it anymore. But I have to say, if I had to pick, the most influential image on my career was the very first one I saw. I can see it right now. I could draw it for you right now. And it shocked my conscience. I had no idea what I was getting into. I will never forget that little boy. That was the very first one.
I had done it for, I don't know, probably 5 or 10 years. And I was fishing with a buddy, and we're fishing for steelhead on the Clackamas River. I was telling him, dude, I just had this horrific case. It was just awful. It was the worst thing I've ever seen, blah, blah, blah. He's a civilian. He's a former school teacher, and we're floating down and we're pulling our plugs and floating down the river, just enjoying a nice day. And he says to me, you've seen a lot of stuff, right? And I was like, yeah, I've seen a lot of stuff. And he said, and this is like the worst thing you've ever seen? And I was like, yeah, it pretty much is. And he's like, I want to know. It's like, dude, you don't want to know. You don't want to know. And he's like, no, if somebody like you is saying it's the worst thing that they've ever seen, I want to know what it is. So I'm like, dude, you don't want it. And he's like, dude, I want to know. I described some of these images to him. And again, this wasn't that I just saw the images on a suspect's computer. This is victims that I later met and hugged and hope are doing really well. But I told him, and he was quiet for 5 minutes. And he said, you're right. I didn't want to know that.
Of course he didn't. Nobody wants to know. Nobody wants to hear this. Anytime anybody asks me about it, I say, you remember the videos when ISIS would capture somebody and saw their head off? You've ever seen one of these? Imagine that 100-fold. It's a child. It's happening to a kid. That is how horrific this stuff is. So you don't want to know. Trust me. That's the closest I will give anybody to what is actually going on, because you don't want to traumatize them, but they've seen these. You've heard of these videos. ISIS is setting people on fire. And then also, people don't realize that it's not just, you don't just look at the picture. It's not a photograph. You have to study it, especially in the discipline that you, Jim and Aaron and everybody created with this victim identification, is you have to study that image repeatedly, and you have to really dig down. You have to immerse yourself in it in order to investigate it.
Absolutely. One of the stories about that case, one of my best friends, prosecutor, and I had 2 prosecutors on the case, both good friends, both really good guys. we're getting ready to go to trial. This is 11 years after we arrested the dude. He spent all 11 years in pretrial custody, and we're going to trial. They call me up the week before the trial. They're like, hey, there was an image that showed the wristwatch, and the wristwatch was in police custody when he took it. Can you find the abuse images that show the wristwatch? We want to make that correlation. So this horrific series that I've been through 50 times since then. I stay at the office till 2 a.m. going through every image to find the wristwatch. So I find the wristwatch image and I send it to them. They're like, oh, that's one of our uncharged victims, so we're not going to use it. I was like, I just spent 6 hours going through every worst image in the world to find this, and then okay, we didn't need that anyway. I was close to a breaking point on that one. I was just like, that one hurt.
That person is completely oblivious as to what you just did.
But I love those guys. I absolutely love
Well,
them.
yeah, of course.
Fantastic prosecutors. They're great human beings, great people. Definitely was like not understanding what the ask was, right?
Yes,
It's, hey,
yeah.
pull up that image. And they think that there's a magic thing. And it's, nope, I have to sort through every one of these thousands of images to find.
But Josh, I love that, man, because you took that upon yourself. They didn't care about the wristwatch or the picture of this wristwatch, but you didn't stop you from caring about it. And you sitting there for hours and hours and hours to do something that you knew would further the identification efforts of somebody. Yeah. You took that upon yourself. That's amazing. That's the kind of people that need to be doing this work, is people that are going to take it upon themselves to investigate fairly and empathetically.
I think we got some good ones coming up. I think that there's some great agents coming up. There's some great cops. I think our efforts, the things that we went through, the lessons we learned are filtering down to them. I think they're dealing with things in a healthier way. I think they're getting a better work-life balance. I'm excited to see the things that they can do. I think we're leaving this mission in capable hands. I'm excited by that.
I agree. I think it's important that we use our past and our ignorance of what was coming. There was no malice in any of this. We just didn't know what we were doing. We were learning as we were going. And people like you that are willing to tell the stories of trauma and be open and vulnerable about it, that's what moves the needle. These conversations, not some policy or this or that. It's talking about it. It's bringing it out into the open. Like you said, it's working. It is absolutely working. And it's so glorious to see, because there was none of this ever back when I didn't even have thought of it. And it's glorious to see us being humanized, just as law enforcement in general. We're finally starting to get humanized. But it's because of people like you that are willing to tell your story and are willing to open up that wound that we can educate the next generation. And if it wasn't for people like you, who's going to do it? You took this upon yourself, Josh, to tell this story, to talk about empathy. And I'm very grateful, because so many people are going to benefit from this.
And it's people like you who are making this podcast.
This is saving lives. This is 100% saving lives. I figure for every 1,000 downloads, roughly, this is my non-scientific Eric Oldenburg math, is for every 1,000 downloads, I think we may have saved one person. And I think that's fair. Would you think that's fair?
Yeah, absolutely.
A huge thank you to Josh for this incredible interview. And if you are left feeling like you want more, please don't worry. I believe Josh and I have plenty more to discuss and plenty more to share with the harmless listeners. As always, if you know someone who needs to listen to this podcast, please let them know. If you need them to hear about it anonymously, please do not hesitate to contact us at harmlessthepodcast@gmail.com. Thank you.